Measures of variability or dispersion in education. In education, it's important not only to understand the average performance of students, but also how much their performance varies. This helps teachers and school leaders see whether students' scores are spread out or clustered closely together. Measures of variability or dispersion are statistical tools that describe how spread out the data is. The main measures of variability are range, mean absolute deviation, standard deviation, and quartile deviation. The range is the simplest measure of variability. It is calculated by subtracting the lowest score from the highest score in a dataset. For example, if the test scores of students are 70, 85, and 95, the range would be 95 minus 70 is equal to 25. This tells you how wide the spread of scores is. The advantage of using the range is that it's easy to calculate, but its disadvantage is that it only considers the highest and lowest values, so it can be misleading if there are extreme scores or outliers. Mean absolute deviation (MAD) is another measure of variability. To calculate MAD, you find the average of the absolute differences between each score and the mean of the data. For example, if the mean of a set of test scores is 85, and the scores are 80, 90, and 95, the differences from the mean are 5, 5, and 10. The mean of these differences is the MAD. MAD gives a better picture of the spread of data than the range because it accounts for every value, not just the highest and lowest. However, it can still be less useful when extreme outliers are present. The standard deviation is one of the most commonly used measures of variability. It shows how much the scores in a dataset deviate on average from the mean. A small standard deviation means that most scores are close to the mean, while a large standard deviation means the scores are spread out. For example, in a class of students who all scored around 80, the standard deviation would be small, indicating that the scores are similar. In a class where scores range widely from 50 to 100, the standard deviation would be large. The advantage of standard deviation is that it gives a detailed measure of variability, but its calculation can be complex and may be harder for some to understand. Quartile deviation, also known as the semi-interquartile range, measures the spread of the middle 50% of the data. It's calculated by subtracting the first quartile Q1 from the third quartile Q3 and dividing by 2. This gives you a measure of how spread out the middle half of the data is, and it's useful when you want to focus on the central portion of the data, ignoring extreme scores. For example, if the first quartile Q1 is 70 and the third quartile Q3 is 90, the quartile deviation would be 90 to 70, /2 is equal to 10. This measure is helpful when you want to know how students in the middle of the class are performing, but it doesn't tell you anything about the extreme ends of the data. Each of these measures has its advantages and disadvantages. The range is simple but can be misleading. The mean absolute deviation is more accurate but still has its limitations, especially in the presence of outliers. The standard deviation is the most commonly used and gives a precise measure of variability, though it's harder to calculate. The quartile deviation is useful when you're focused on the middle 50% of data, but it doesn't consider extreme values. In educational settings, understanding these measures can help teachers and school leaders make better decisions about how to support students. For example, if most students' scores are clustered around the average, but there are a few very low or very high scores, it might suggest the need for targeted interventions for students who are struggling or excelling. If the standard deviation is large, it may indicate that the class is very diverse in terms of performance, and teachers may need to adjust their approach to meet a range of student needs. By using measures of variability, educational leaders can assess not just the average performance of students, but also the spread of their scores, helping to make more informed decisions about curriculum, teaching methods, and individual student support. These measures also provide valuable insights into the effectiveness of educational programs and can help identify areas where changes may be needed.